Hi, this is Brian again, and if you're just joining us, we just finished rendering out a bunch of files in the After Effects render queue, and now we're going to take them into Sony Vegas and we're going to do batch rendering. Now this is something that I've noticed a lot of really good After Effects professionals don't know much about. You know, and I don't blame them because they're so focused on producing the best motion graphics, they don't really have a lot of time for like codecs and file sizes. So this is kind of an easy primer, and this is for the Windows users out there. Now there are a number of different ways to batch convert files, but whatever you do, the first thing you want to do is define your output formats. Now there are a number of preset formats for you to choose from in Sony Vegas, but you might want to create your own just to make sure that you have exactly the right format you want. Now some of the most popular formats out there include Blu-ray players, DVDs, and files for the internet. We should also render out a high fidelity but still compressed master file just so that we have something for the archive purposes. So the first thing we'll do is we'll create a new file and generate some stuff. It doesn't matter what stuff we generate, it's just so that we can access the File Render As menu. Then we do go to File Render As, and this opens up the dialog for rendering out files. Let's start by saving our archive format. I like to use Main Concept's MPEG-2 player. Then we hit the custom key to enter the particulars of this particular render setting. Now as you can see, I'm entering in the frame size, frame rate, and bit rate. Since I want this to be our archive format, let's save it at a very high bit rate, around 25 megabits per second. This will be a very big file, of course, but not as big as the uncompressed files we got out of After Effects. And make sure that Include Audio Stream on the Audio tab is checked, and that Save as Separate Elementary Streams on the System tab is not. That way you have video and audio on the same file. Finally, set the video recording quality to Best. Anything less than that is only useful for drafts, not for final proofs or archive footage. Now, once you're happy with the settings, you can give it a new name by typing in the bar at the top of the dialog box and then hitting the save icon. In this case, I'm naming the preset Archive 25 megabits per second 1080p24, which tells me what it's used for, what the bit rate is, and the frame size and frame rate. So let's go back and we'll set another preset, this one for authoring to Blu-ray. Now we won't author a Blu-ray file here, but Blu-ray files are typically MPEG-2 files or MPEG-4 files at high bit rates. So it's useful for when you do author Blu-ray files to get them into the MPEG-2 format. It saves the conversion step later on down the road. The only thing we'll change here is that we'll lower the bit rate to 8 megabits per second and rename the template Blu-ray 8 megabits per second 1080p24 and save it. Why 8 megabits per second? Well, sometimes you need to transfer Blu-ray files to a client, and while they don't have a Blu-ray player, they've probably got a DVD-ROM drive somewhere on a computer. The maximum read speed of DVD-ROMs is somewhere around 9 megabits per second, so with a little bit of headroom, this will play smoothly as a data file on a DVD disc. Knowledge is power. Anyway, speaking of DVDs, we want to create a DVD-sized file as well. That is, DVDs that you play in your normal, ordinary DVD player. Now, there are two formats, NTSC and PAL. The system we use here in New Zealand is PAL, and that gives us a resolution of 720 by 576. Don't worry that that doesn't actually render to a widescreen format, because when you set the aspect ratio to be 69, so it'll just use non-square pixels. Anyway, we're choosing the output type as DVD, a 23.976 frame rate, and a bit rate of, well, let's say 1 megabits per second, and call it DVD 1 megabit per second 576p24. Now, DVDs, as I said, have a maximum read speed of around 8 megabits per second. And if you're rendering to a final master for a movie, like say for Hollywood, there's no reason why you wouldn't go ahead and do that. But typically you can get away with 1 megabit per second as long as there's not a whole lot of fast action. Quite frankly, you can use the extra file size to put more movie on your DVD. Now let's go out of this dialog and choose Main Concept AVC AAC. And what this does is it records H.264 MP4 files, and right now that's kind of leader in compression. Now these require QuickTime 7 or better, or another H.264 codec to play back, and they take a little bit more computer processing oomph, but you can record them at lower bit rates and still have higher fidelity than MPEG-2. In this case, we want to create a 720p version of the file for YouTube. Sure, YouTube supports 1080p now, but in most cases 720p does just fine, and we can get away with a lower bit rate at that resolution. So that keeps our file size down, makes transferring it to YouTube a whole lot better. Generally, I think I get the best bang for the buck at 720p 24 and 4 megabits per second. So let's go ahead and do that. If I was going to do 1080p video for YouTube, I'd probably go with 8 megabits per second, but we'll just go with 720p for right now and call this one YouTube 4 Mbps, 720p 24. We can also do a low resolution video for iPods and iPod devices, or maybe you have something that you want to put on your home page but you don't want to suck up the bandwidth bill. Here we create a file that's 320 by 240, but we adjust the pixel aspect ratio to 1.333. That way the final file will be the correct aspect ratio, the 69 widescreen format. And here, because it's such a small frame size, you can have a bit rate that's as low as 192 kilobits per second. And you can call this one iPod 192 kilobits per second 240p 24. Now quit out of and relaunch Sony Vegas. It's a little bit of an unnecessary step, but this way it'll show up, all the changes we made will show up in the next step. Now that we've saved all these files, we can start a new project at 1080p 24 and drag the files that we rendered out from After Effects into the same timeline. We can then set up what are called regions by highlighting the sections of videos we want to render out and pressing R, one section for each video. So when it comes time to render, we can then create a separate file for each region. Now to render this way, you go to Tools, Scripts, and Batch Render. We select render regions from the selection on the bottom, choose the file formats that we created earlier. Now, Batch Render will render each of our regions in each of the file formats we selected. The only problem is, what if you can't choose to put all the files on the same timeline? Let's say that you've got each of these files working in different projects and you need to render out multiple projects that after applying effects in the nonlinear editor or whatever, and you just can't copy and paste them to the same timeline. Well, since version 8.0, Sony Vegas has allowed for nested projects. That means you can save each file in a different project and then use this technique to batch render by putting the different project files, you just copy it over like it was a video file, in the same timeline and setting regions like we did before. Now you're probably going to say that there's an easier way to do this, and you're right, but it's only through a pay-for third-party plugin known as Veggie Toolkit. It costs around, I think, 80 bucks, not sure on that. Maybe a little bit more, and that's 80 bucks American. You can use Veggie Toolkit's multi-render application, and you can do the same thing. It's a little bit more powerful, it's a little bit simpler to use. I think it's worth the money, but if you don't want to pay for it, we have the other two options as mentioned before. Now, if you don't need to do any editing and just want to batch render the file directly from the After Effects uncompressed format to a compressed format, you can use an application called Media Coder, and this is an advertising supported app. So it doesn't cost you anything, but it's going to nag you every so often if you want to see the web page. But it works well. Just be aware that it's not a nonlinear editor. This is a transcoder. All it does is transcode files from one format to another. Finally, I'm going to leave you with a little tip. When you're rendering out in Sony Vegas, you can go into the Windows Task Manager and then right-click and choose Set Priority. Then if you set it to below average priority, when Vegas is rendering, it'll only use up spare cycles you're not using for other projects, like for example web browsing, Microsoft Word writing, so you can get a lot of stuff done while you're rendering and not have to worry about slowdowns. That's about it. Thank you for watching, and if you're a Mac user, you watched the wrong video, check out the other video that we have on batch rendering for the Mac. Thank you.